I'll just let's start now.
Okay, let's go.
You ready?
Yeah, let's go, Morten.
Great. Welcome to this podcast episode. And today I'm excited to be here with Andrew Stordy, who is the inventor of the IKAWA technology and organization behind bringing it to the market. So I've always loved the product, but also through the many years of collaboration, I've appreciated the organization and the business culture. So I'm excited to finally be able to sit down and poke your mind about different questions that my listeners would find interesting and inspiring too. I'll ask you about how it all gets started and try to grasp the unique journey of the technology and company, as both the technology and startup process is relevant for our listeners. So personally, I saw the IKAWA for the first time in 2012 at the green coffee trader McCan's office in London. And since 2015, we've used the IKAWA for sample roasting, pilot roasting, consultancy, scientific research. But enough about us. So, Andrew, would you mind to kind of give us a bit of background of what sparked the idea behind the IKAWA coffee roaster?
Okay, thanks, Morten. Thanks for the intro, Morten. Like, you were definitely one of the first people who we talked to on our journey with IKAWA. So it's really nice actually to talk to you about this now. So where does IKAWA start? I guess IKAWA for me starts with my childhood, my background. When I was a kid, my dad worked in coffee growing countries he's an agriculturalist. He was helping coffee farmers in some instances grow better coffee. And in the early 80s, we lived in a little island in the South Pacific called Tanna Island in a country called Vanuatu. Hardly anyone's ever heard of this place, but it has a volcano on it, I remember. And when we came back to England, we bought a big oil barrel full of green coffee. And in our family, we would roast coffee in this sort of coffee roaster. It's like a frying pan with a handle on the top, this here. And
so is this actually from your family?
Yeah, this is the real one.
This is the one you did.
So we would roast coffee in this and then pour it out and onto big trays to cool down. And my mum and dad would serve it to people when they came around for lunch and things like that. But I guess for we were in England 20 years ago. Everybody drank instant coffee.
Yeah.
And I'm sure our coffee was really over roasted and tasted awful. But I think it's that processed experience of roasting coffee, the kind of story which you can tell with a coffee, which we identified with and liked.
But I would always prefer a kind of perhaps not optimum roasted, but fresh coffee of great quality to most of the supermarket instant that you can find out there. So there's you don't have to kind of excuse if it wasn't perfectly roasted. I'm sure it's a completely different experience to get something that's freshly roasted, even if it's in a frying pan, if your alternative is supermarket instant.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of coffee is about the rituals that go with it. Yeah. And for some people a really dark bitter coffee is what they like, and they just do like that in terms of, but I think what people like flavor wise is often what people are used to.
Yeah.
But actually it's the rituals and the other things that go behind drinking coffee, which is also part of what people enjoy.
Yeah. So you have a authentic, genuine kind of tradition behind loving coffee, other than just coming up with that technology, right? So that's I didn't know that. So that's a great background story.
Well, you see this. So I think we got to this very beginnings of coffee for me, but then the actual start of IKAWA is I'm an engineer, and early part of my career I worked for for Ford, a car company, designing engines. And then I went to study design at the Royal College of Art, which is like an art college in London, because I wanted to do something more creative. And I think ultimately I wanted to sort of use my skills in a way which changed something bigger than just the specifications of engine components, for example. So the original idea when I was studying at DRCA with IKAWA, I was interested in the supply chain of coffee, and I was interested in how the coffee growers earn a small proportion of what the consumer pays, and the people who it's not their fault, but in the supply chain of coffee, the money ends up with retailers and a roasting company, because their costs are highest because they're based in the consuming countries. And the kind of original vision with IKAWA, and it's still our home product, is that you're able to get coffee directly from the producers, miss out the middlemen, and roast it yourself at home. So that was what I started with at university, and I designed this machine actually, which is like the idea is it was going to be a roaster grinder brewer. So you would how did it work? You put coffee in here.
Yeah, so just for the listeners, kind of, this is a wooden box, and on top of it sits two round glass vessels, and one of them has kind of a sieve in the bottom, and the other one has a glass tube in the middle. So if you don't know what this is, there's no way you can guess it.
So the idea of the way this would work, the coffee would roast in this half of it,
with the one with the sieve in the bottom.
Yeah. And then there was this kind of magnet which pulled up a ball, and the coffee dropped down a chute into down here, the bit underneath the other side.
After it has been roasted, there was a mechanism to release it out of the glass vessel, and then it would go down into the hidden area of the wooden box, right?
Yeah, that's right. And then inside there's a grinder, like a kind of, like a type where a blade whizzes round.
So there's a grinder hidden in the box.
Like in there.
Yeah.
And then this part of it was the other side of it was like a vacuum brewer. So you would, the water in this vessel would boil, and would be pushed by the steam down into the the place where the coffee is, and then the heating element would switch off, and the steam in here would condense, and it would pull up the coffee, and you'd end up with a pot of coffee.
So basically, in the one side, you've got the roaster, and when it's roasted, it goes into the grinder, and then it's basically brewed in the grinding chamber.
That's right, yeah.
So it's brewed in the grinding chamber, and once that's done, it will then be pushed into the glass vessel. So the whole grinding and brewing is happening in the hidden part of the wooden box, and then out comes brewed. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So that's a whole roaster, grinder, and brewer in one wooden box.
That's right. And so this was my kind of looks like prototype, but I also had one which actually worked.
You had one that works?
Yeah, and the coffee was really awful. It tasted terrible.
Was it?
Yeah, it was really...
Even if it was freshly roasted and ground and brewed?
Well, I don't know. I think I didn't... The way it was roasted wasn't very sophisticated. I think we just sort of blasted it with hot air for 5 minutes or something. But anyway, I think that idea kind of encapsulated my business idea in a way, or my like vision-led an idea for how I might make the coffee industry better for coffee growers.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting. Now, my knowledge of IKAWA is kind of as a professional. So here you are linking the green coffee supplier to the consumer in one apparatus. That's really interesting.
Yes, yeah. So that still is the kind of still is the vision of our home roaster. I mean, the way to consume. I think like with any business, when we started it, and we pretty quickly I managed to get some investment from a few people in the business, and we quite quickly realized that it's going to be very expensive to design the roaster, grinder, brewer machine, and the advice I got at that time was that the coffee probably wouldn't taste so great because it hadn't degassed. So we looked for a market where we could sell a product manufacture a product in relatively small quantities and sell it for a high enough price to actually make a profit on it. And one of our investors, Phil Schluter, is a coffee trader. So he told us about the Probat, like the traditional sample roaster.
Coffee browners, I call them.
Yeah, which he was using in his office. Because at that time, like coffee sample roasting was either you had sort of traditional drum Probat or other brand sample roaster, or you had a very cheap home roaster.
Yeah.
So we started out. We simplified it to just a roaster because we figured the people who would want to roast their own coffee probably have their own brewing equipment anyway, and the roaster's a bit of kit they needed. And we sort of pivoted and started with a coffee roasting machine. I think it was for a sample roast, and I think it was probably around that time that my co-founder Rombout met you, I think, at London School of Coffee, I think.
2012, yeah.
Yeah. And
because at that point it had that shape of the...
Yeah, so somewhere along the line, first of all, we had a kind of square just roaster, but somewhere along the line, we came up with the IKAWA shape, and really the IKAWA shape's driven by what's inside it. Like we came up with the idea of using a cyclone and the beans ending up in the jar in the way we do, the way they're blown over, and the jars kind of got two purposes for collecting the chaff and also the beans.
Yeah, which is a great way of minimizing moving parts, which is always a pain in any technology.
Yeah, no, I do feel proud of the design. Actually,
that's really brilliant.
It's pretty elegant in its sort of simplicity. The way it's only one moving part inside the roaster.
Yeah, which is the fan that drives the airflow.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we ended up with a sample roaster, and that I think what's kind of ironic in a way is that because I started out with a consumer product, my vision was to encode the profile for roasting the coffee on the packet of the coffee, and then the business would be about the machines, but also about the coffee. To necessitate that business model working, the technology had to make the roasting really easy. So the IKAWA, and ultimately, like the fact that it makes roasting easy and highly controlled, is the USP of the professional products as much as the home. Actually, what we found out was that
perhaps even more so.
Yeah, that's right. Well, what we found out was that in order to use a traditional sample roaster, you had to become expert. You had to have a fair amount of training to be able to use the machine. Often, like each barrel would roast coffee differently. And
we've all seen these places with 4, 6, 8 barrels where people are juggling, just like juggling the plates in a circus.
And that was the norm at the time.
So not only that you have to be an expert per barrel, but you also had to stay with your attention and really worry that you screwed it up. So it was an extremely stressful and full attention kind of demanding exercise. I've roasted on these browners. We had one at Contra, and it was highly stressful, and I didn't feel in control with what I do or how it all ended.
Yeah, and
So,
I guess
so seeing the IKAWA, where you can basically, I can do I've done research projects with this one where I had to do 90 roasts in 2 days, and I got all my emails done, and it was all perfect. So that's a huge relief if you tried the old browners.
yeah, I imagine if you were just getting 100-gram sample of coffee
Yeah.
to roast in that machine, and you messed it up, that's that coffee gone.
Yeah.
So that's how we ended up with what IKAWA is best known for as a sample roaster, and at a certain point the business kind of organically grew, which was fantastic.
If you think about the whole period since you came up with the idea, if you should name a few kind of the biggest challenges that you faced, where you kind of almost thought this is not going to work, and then something happened, or has there been these? It's just any business owner, all business owners, we have these kind of periods where things really was a problem, and then something turned it. So what's the story of IKAWA here?
I think what your challenges are depends on who you are and what your personal strengths are. So I think if I sort of were to start IKAWA again, it feels to me like a kind of a miracle in a way that we got as far as we did.
I know that feeling.
It's like all the different challenges you had. So at that time I had no money myself or anything. Like, all I had was my idea, and had to. Yeah. The biggest challenge for me, I think, was raising investment and the kind of business side of it. But what I was able to do was design the mechanical elements of a product, so I was able to kind of leverage that. But I'm not a good salesman.
No, but what strikes me, and with the what I've kind of seen with the IKAWA organization, is that you managed quite early to get a board of directors to kind of help you out with strategy. That's something I've never succeeded with. So so there's things you've done to get support quite early.
Yes, that's right, and I've had huge support actually from our board of directors.
Yeah.
I think I'm really fortunate that their motivations for being involved in IKAWA are mixed. It's not only a financial business. Maybe I wouldn't invest in IKAWA if it was a financial choice. It's also genuinely about people who are interested in different ways in the coffee industry, in the kind of particularly the producer end of the coffee industry. I think pretty much most of our board members are either from coffee producing countries at the moment, or have a sort of long background in being interested in where coffee comes from.
Yeah. So what if you think about the specifically technical design? What was it that you kind of, what has been the biggest struggle where you kind of thought that can this even, is it even possible to do this? What is it that you feel is the biggest kind of problem that you've solved when it comes to roasting design?
Well, I think the thing which we put a huge amount of energy into, and I think it's probably more than what's typical. I'm sure it's more than, I know that, say, with industrial roasters, they don't even roast coffee in them before they ship them out. But for us, it's really, for our USP, it's really important for us to the best of our ability, make each roaster roast the same, because that's really important, because people can share profiles and we want people to roast coffee the same on each roaster. So each machine is, each machine which we make, we roast a batch of coffee on, and we measure the color of it to make sure it's the right, make sure it's working correctly before we ship it out. But it's really quite tricky. Like, just the smallest things can result in it not, one machine not being the same as the next.
Yeah, because it's also very important that it's airtight, right? Because the air goes through even the electronics. Or was that the earlier models? Or
yeah, no, that's true. Another challenge, like a sort of physical technical challenge, is the machine's quite small, and on the inside, the place where the coffee's roasting, some parts of it reach like 300 degrees C.
Yeah.
And they're within centimeters of other things which need to be at like 60,
like
like room temperature almost. Yeah. So the way it kind of sucks air into the case, the air, it doesn't have like a pipe inside it which the air goes through. It's the whole machine as part of the pipe, if you like. So air's blown into the machine, and it swooshes around inside the machine. It kind of is rooted around inside the machine. It cools things down before it goes up through the place where the coffee roasts.
Yeah.
And it roasts the coffee. And like keeping the kind of exterior of the machine cool enough to touch was part of the challenge out, which is quite...
Yeah, so the big challenge has been to put a lot of things in a small area where you had very different requirements for temperatures. Electronics, room temperature, roasting 300.
That's right.
In a small area.
Yeah. Or even like finding... Actually, another challenge was just finding components for it, because it's not... It's not a... how would you describe it? It's not a commodity product. Like if you want to design a vacuum cleaner, as an example, you can go to companies that manufacture vacuum cleaner motors. They manufacture...
Yeah. There's no precedence for
that that's
type
right.
of solution.
So we're something like the motor, the fan that blows the air through it, in order to get it at a reasonable, to buy it at a reasonable price, you have to have something that's kind of used in a different machine already.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you make everything bespoke, it just becomes incredibly expensive. So, actually, the fan inside it is actually a kind of adapted. We've put a different type of motor on a vacuum cleaner. The thing that sucks in the vacuum cleaner is the same thing that blows in the IKAWA.
Yeah, but which is interesting, because that's the general design of any blower, right? But the trick is to get it in the right size with the right amount without it costing a fortune, right?
Yes, that's right. Well, you have blowers which blow a lot of volume of air but don't produce much pressure, and the things that cool computers, etc., like that. And then you have things which, inside the IKAWA, it needs a sort of middle ground where it produces quite a lot of pressure with not a huge volume of air. And that was quite hard to find.
Yeah, because what we talked about here, about the whole simplicity of the design, that's also really what I love about it. It does exactly what you need, and in a very, it's a form factor. You can just grab it very quickly, put it under the in the cupboard, and take it out quickly and put it under the stove hood. It's very, you can quickly set it up, get roasting, and then put it away again.
Yeah.
And it's not very heavy, and so that's what it makes it. It's so handy in a laboratory. It doesn't take up space, and you don't have to kind of be over it all the time. You can do other things on the other side. That's really what I've loved about it on a more daily basis.
I think one thing which I'm not sure everyone kind of, if you've just seen pictures of the IKAWA people, I think part of its weakness is part of it is that it looks nice. But the problem with it looking nice is it doesn't look like an industrial thing. It looks like a nice design thing. So people assume it's going to be sort of made of plastic and things like that. So it's actually the whole there's no components in it which aren't made out of metal. It's really quite a highly engineered thing.
People have this picture of what a coffee roaster is.
That's right.
And it's industrial and it's big and it's something with a horizontal drum, which that's a fair enough design, right? But you can have others. But in a lab, I still think it works perfectly with the design. Could you talk a bit more about your what kind of surprises did you find when you in the beginning you wanted to address consumers, and then when you found out that it actually worked perfectly for coffee professionals? What was your biggest kind of realizations about coffee professionals as a species? What do they focus on? What's important? Did you kind of change your way of thinking about coffee roasting by kind of realizing that you had to also pay a lot of attention selling to coffee professionals? Is there some realizations you had comparing those two segments?
I think for most of our customers, I think IKAWA has different uses for different customer types, but for the biggest user type as a sample roaster, what they're using it for is just evaluating the coffee. So I think if you think of that job which someone needs to do when they're tasting the coffee, really they need what you described earlier, something which is easy to use and it just does the roast for them without too much complexity. Maybe the actual roast for sample evaluation isn't incredibly important, and I think that's where the real value of IKAWA comes for users, is in its sort of simplicity to use, the fact that you can do something else while you're using it. But I think if you kind of on a very basic level ask people what they wanted in the coffee industry before we started, they would have told us we wanted a drum. It's got to roast 100 grams of coffee at least. It's got to have this sensor, that sensor, all these complicated things. And I think people in coffee love lines and graphs and data and all that stuff.
Even if they don't know what to use them for.
Even if it maybe doesn't mean a lot. But I think we're adding more, we've added more sensors over time to the roaster, more complexity, and it gives people the option of getting into it if they really want to. But for many users, the fact that the machine's easy to use is probably its greatest selling point.
Yeah. It's funny because I remember one of the earliest feedback I gave you was that I think it should be able to roast 100 grams. I remember that. But over the years, I've started to appreciate the 50, because if you get 200 grams from your supplier, you can do 4 experiments. So I think it's a perfect size. You don't need more. And if you want to do 10 experiments, you only spend 500 grams. So it's nothing. You can get a lot of information for no use, right? So I think as a sample roaster and a pilot roaster, that's perfect. because you don't waste anything, right? You've got 15 grams to clean the grinder, so you get typically at 42 out, right? So you get 15 grams to clean the grinder, and then you've got 30 grams, so you can do 3 cups of 10 grams, or you can do 2 cups of 12. So that's exactly what you need and nothing more. Now I'm using it also for all my training courses, and here 100 grams is really nice. So for different purposes, different sizes are needed. But in the beginning, I used it as a sample roaster, and I don't know why I was hung up on the 100 grams. So in a sense, I almost regret that feedback.
Yeah.
But now for other purposes, it's great to have 100 grams.
Yeah, no, that was pretty common feedback at that time. We made it 50 grams because it was easier to control the roaster when it's roasting a smaller quantity of coffee.
What about the energy need? But that wouldn't be
Yeah,
a problem
it uses less energy, but it's the bigger the roaster is, the harder it is to kind of make the temperature controller follow the line, if you like.
Yeah.
And maybe we should have made it 100 grams to start with, because we later launched a 100-gram version, but we've found actually that many people prefer the 50-gram one. In a way, I think we maybe sort of changed the industry a little bit, in that, like, sometimes maybe the size of samples which are sent out is smaller now, because for a coffee trader you don't necessarily have a huge quantity of coffee which you can send out. So we sell both now.
Yeah, which is great. Great. So what about? I'm just curious about this. What, if anything, in Coffee Mind's approach is resonating with you? And so that's the first question. And is there anything in our approach that's kind of slipped into some design or some internal practices in way to work with your product?
Well, we have your profile, one of your profiles in our profile library.
Yeah.
We'd like to add more, but I think for me, more just as an individual, really, like, it's the way coffee, what you need to do to make the coffee flavor change by changing the roast profile is really confusing and difficult. And I think you've got quite a process which I understand, and I can I know what to do in order to change the roast, to change the flavor of the coffee. Because I think there's a lot of different opinions, lots of information in coffee roasting, and it's really hard. It's really, really hard to work out what to change. And I think that's particularly the case in the IKAWA, because there's so much flexibility in what profile you can create. You can really create any shape you like. So there's this huge variation of parameters you can change in terms of the way the temperature can change, and that gives you a lot of choice. Whereas with an industrial roast, with a sort of tradition, like a production drum roast, you kind of put the coffee in, switch on the gas, and the coffee heats up. the shape of it's pretty much driven by the kind of mechanics, the engine, the physics of the system it's in. It's not really have a huge choice.
Yeah.
And IKAWA you can do anything in, but I think a relatively simple profile and changing the darkness of a coffee and the development time seem to be the simple factors which I understand.
Yeah, where you feel that you understand the assumptions behind the recommendation.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, I'm happy, because you've probably heard about a lot of different theories and have to kind of also adapt to a lot of demands from the consumers, even though you might not agree or kind of
Yeah.
disagree?
Well, one of these, one which I've always, well, the customer's always right. But a lot of people make profiles on the IKAWA where the profile goes down and then it goes up again.
Yeah.
And that's because, in a production roaster, the temperature goes down, the temperature sensor reading goes down and up.
Yeah.
But of course, the temperature of the coffee only ever goes up.
Yeah.
And on the IKAWA, I personally don't feel that makes much sense. But people...
To ask the machine to start high and then go down, right?
Well,
Yeah.
if you want to start high, just leave it high because the sensor reading will go down and the coffee temperature will just go up.
Yeah, because you will see that in on the IKAWA profile. If you have my recipes, I start with the fewest possible assumptions. So I always want to ask the system to start pretty close to where the green coffee is anyway, right?
Yeah.
So I start at 120. But then you can see that the machine needs to, that it will be cooled down just like in a normal roaster, and eventually it will catch up very quickly so in this small amount. But you will get this anyway, so there's no need to kind of make it, design it to do this.
Well, it's like you're changing the, when it goes down like that, what you're doing is changing the target temperature which the roaster is trying to reach. So if you make the target temperature suddenly plummet and then suddenly rise up, the roaster's constantly doing its best to follow the line, but it doesn't make it easier for it to follow the line. It makes it harder. I think maybe if I did a profile, it would just start at 50 degrees C and just rise up from there. Because then the whole time the profile's kind of controlled.
Yeah, so it's in steady state much earlier, right?
Yeah.
So perhaps I should even lower it from 120 and even, but I thought I was rebellious going close to 100 when I looked at the other profiles. Talking about, so that's one thing that you feel has kind of spilled in from Coffee Mind's conceptual world and into IKAWA, some more simple model to understand what's going on and what to change and why.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, and I also noticed that you said that you're testing all your machines to make sure that the color and temperature correlates, so that people that's also a focus on color as the main thing that makes the machine behave the same.
Yeah, it's super hard. Like measuring the color of a coffee as your quality measure is not ideal because each different coffees will come out a different color. If the way which you grind the coffee changes the color by sometimes like a coarse grind to fine grind can change the Agtron points by like 20 points we've found. So there's many kind of difficulties in using that as a quality measure for that the machine's working properly, but ultimately we sort of find that to a certain extent the coffee doesn't lie. Your temperature sensor can tell you you're reading a certain sensor and it gives you a readout, but you can't tell it's right. So you need something, the processes in the coffee actually ultimately tell you whether it's right or not.
Which is then the color, right?
Yeah, ultimately the color, yeah.
Yeah. Great. I have a very specific question, which is a question that I've struggled with answering, and it annoys me infinitely that I'm not able to answer it. I do have some hypotheses, but a hypothesis is not as interesting as a fact. So one of the things that I was confused about in the beginning with the IKAWA was, to me, a pretty short roast time was better than the roast time that I normally see on drum roasters. On drum roasters, typically you will see first crack in 9 minutes, and so you have typically 10 to 11 minutes roast time on drum roasters, where on the IKAWA I prefer much shorter roasting times, and this was something that I kind of I really made up my mind during a roasting project with Tim Vendelbo we did many years ago on was actually a fertilization project, but at that point I had done some research project on the Probatino, and it was just, I was so stressed because I had very little green, and it was green that has been made by people who had been dividing fields into plots and fertilizing specifically the different areas. So if I screwed up on the roasting, all of that expensive time, can you imagine the amount of time researchers spent to go through all this? So for me to kind of put it in and something went wrong, I would be devastated. I remember I had 1.5 kilo per sample. And in order to also even out, if you are doing a research project, it's important that each process is replicated, so that there can be no random things in each process that can kind of determine or be a confounder for the outcome. So you need to do something at least 3 times and mix it to have a sample. So I had to do 500 gram roast on a 1 kilo roaster and 3 of them. And if I just screwed up one of them, that's it. So Tim came down and we did some tests across what we roasted on my Probatino and on the IKAWA to see if we felt that the IKAWA could provide valuable. At that point, I didn't really know if it could, produce at the same quality or whatever. But even also the advantage of roasting a lot of small samples and then mixing it to even out any possible variation. But most importantly, so that I could sleep at night the day before I should roast. So at that point, Tim and I, we tried different roast on the Probatino and on the IKAWA. And we finally decided that a very short roast time. Tim had been roasting on the IKAWA for a while and had these short roast times. And I challenged him and said, it has to be longer because it's more up to the coffee, the optimal time than the technology. So I had the assumption it should be longer. But after our test, I kind of agreed that it's definitely, it worked for the purpose, quality wise, but also that the roast times had to be this short. And I'm very curious to hear your technical approach to, if you could kind of guess why the roast times are better, much shorter on the IKAWA than on a drum roaster. I know I'm putting you on the spot, and I can't answer the question. So if you can,
I don't know, honestly. Like,
I also my answer.
I think, the feedback we've had from the outset is that the roast is shorter. Like typical roast on a cow is like 6, 7, 8 minutes or something like that. I don't know. Maybe the heat's transferred into the coffee better. Because it's more air flowing around the coffee, perhaps.
Yeah, it's a similar hypothesis that I have. My hypothesis is that on a big roaster, you have a constraint of how quickly you can add energy, because you have some kind of a significant surface area of the batch that shouldn't be scorched in order to heat up the center. So in the IKAWA, because you have a smaller amount, you are already a few minutes into the roast, in the sense that everything is hot at the same time.
Yes.
So you're not scorching the surface layer of the batch to heat up the center.
Yeah, I imagine like inside a big roaster, the individual bean, probably spends a good bit of its time like in a big blob with a whole load of other coffee beans.
Yes.
And the temperature of those other coffee beans is likely to impact the temperature of an individual bean to a greater extent. With a IKAWA, I think one of the things about the IKAWA is like the power to weight ratio, or power to amount of coffee ratio is huge in comparison to a production roaster. So much more energy available versus the.
But that would explain why it would scorch coffee if it was short, right? It doesn't explain why it is gentle enough to not scorch it at a short time. And it might be that the whole system is perfectly mixed because it's so small. Where a big one, there's a limit to how much energy you can add to the overall average batch, because it would have to be delivered in a shorter or smaller area where you would burn beans, because the energy cannot be instantly distributed everywhere.
Yes. No, I'm following your thought. It's like, I suppose, if you had 10 kilos of coffee and you wanted to heat it up at the rate you can heat up the coffee in the IKAWA, you'd have to blast air onto that coffee, which would be really, really hot. So any little beans on the outside of that big mass will get burnt, and the ones on the inside
It might
won't
be
get
that
burnt.
if you have kind of a big roaster with 10 kilos and you had a tube with a lot of air coming out, so that you could put all the energy simultaneously everywhere, rather than only through a small.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe. No,
Maybe
but
we should give that a go.
it wouldn't be practical. But it's just one of the things. Everybody asks me the question, and it annoys me that I only have an anecdotal kind of story, because that's what the business is full of anecdotes. But it was just now I had you here, I had to ask that question, because it's a question that I always cannot really answer. And in a sense, I don't think that you should be able to answer it, because sometimes, and that's also why I teach people, we are not fundamental scientists here, we are applied scientists. So we need to just do what works for the purpose that we needs to get solved, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a big problem to not be able to answer it, but it's just the curiosity in me.
Yeah, I have a similar, like, for some reason I've observed that in the IKAWA, you can get a really consistent roast if your coffee is consistent. Each bean comes out looking the same. But if your coffee's not consistent, and it must be down to the coffee, because it depends which coffee you put in, you get more Quakers. Like, Quakers seem to be more kind of visible when it's in a cow roaster if a coffee is not consistent. And I like now I think I think of it as, like, makes it a really good sample roaster, because it brings out the defects in the coffee more, so you can identify that. But yeah, I don't know why that is, because I don't think it's that each bean has been heated. I think the beans are all mixed up nicely inside the machine.
But could it be something with the airflow? Because I remember some years ago I planned to do an oxygen-free roasting and here the IKAWA would be perfect. So I actually calculated how much nitrogen we needed, and I remember something like with 300 liters per minute or something like that. So I needed to spend 1,000 euros on
Wow.
on nitrogen to do that project. It was something that I talked with Loring about doing. Eventually, we didn't do it, basically because I was too busy. But it could be something. But you can always change the airflow in the IKAWA. So it's not, you're constrained to high airflow. But I just remember something like that. It could be that the differences come out if there's I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's to do with the coffee. I think the beans are evenly heated up. It's just, for some reason, it seems to highlight Quakers more than other things. I think. Did you ever finish the nitrogen project?
No, we didn't. I kind of I got too busy with other things at that point, unfortunately. But it could be fun to do. But that would be Loring at that point had a problem with. Somebody once said that it tasted more smoky, and that's one of the other anecdotes, that because you have a recirculation of the air, it's more smoky. And so it could be a way of testing the chemistry of oxygen versus non-oxygen, and so it could be interesting, but it's not the most interesting question, I would say, in coffee roasting. There are things that's much more, I feel, more pressing.
Yeah.
So what about the future? What is it that you focus on right now that you really want to kind of bring to the community, or where do you see IKAWA's technology?
Well, we're involved. We're branching out a bit, and we're doing some partnerships with other companies, developing work and development of production roasters. But I think really for us at the moment the focus is on just getting our focusing on getting our core product working really well and marketing it well for now.
Great. So that might align a bit with the. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Although I forgot, I should mention we have also our latest model of roaster's got a humidity sensor in, and a light. So that's something new which we've come across through experimentation, and we've taken a really sort of user-centered design approach to bringing it to market, and I'm kind of interested in how the humidity sensor will give coffee roasters more information about the coffee which they're roasting.
Yeah. I remember I saw this, is it a year ago, a bit more? I was here and signed an NDA and all that, and you showed it to me, and I think it's at least 10 years ago that I was looking into that, because I really wanted to know about what I could see in what I could read in the exhaust in terms of moisture. It must say something interesting. And I remember I was kind of chasing down people at food science, where they have a lot of weird equipment, and even at DTU, Danish Technical University, I reached out to somebody to find sensors that could cope with high temperatures, because I kind of had the idea that I had to stick in a sensor and measure it, but nobody could find anything that could measure above 70 degrees. So when I saw your brilliant solution, I was just kind of, wow, this was exactly what I couldn't even think of at that point. So basically you're cooling it down by letting it go inside in a small vessel.
Yeah, we have a little pipe inside the roaster, and we sort of siphon off a little bit of air, which, because of the way the kind of pressure works inside the roaster, it just blows. A bit of air gets blown down this pipe, and then it goes over a humidity sensor and measures the humidity. And I think I was probably just playing around when I tried it for the first time. But what we found is that typically with a coffee roast, it depends a bit on the profile, but typically when the coffee starts cracking, the reading on the humidity sensor shoots up.
And it does really, really much so.
Yeah, it's really surprising. And then after the kind of first cracks finished, the humidity reading starts dropping.
Yeah, and I've always wanted to see that, because I've always told people that first crack is a function of the water boiling, but I wasn't even sure that it would be a big signal if you actually measured it, because there's a lot of space between beans, and there's a lot of space that's got nothing. I mean, the beans are not that big in most roasters. They take up 10% of the space. In the IKAWA, perhaps a bit more so. But I'm really surprised to see that what I've seen on your graph, that it's a completely clear signal.
Yeah, well, I guess, I don't know. Say, I don't know what percentage of a coffee is water. Is it like 15%?
Yeah, 11 plus minus.
So in 100 grams, there'd be 10 grams of water.
Yeah.
In there. Have I got that right?
Yeah,
that's right. 10 grams of water. And that would, I guess, in the air, how much water is there per meter squared of air? It's probably grams. So maybe releasing 10 grams 5 of those 10 grams into the air.
Yeah, but I've just been in so many situations where I kind of do those kind of rule of thumb thing, and then I measure, and then there's nothing.
Yeah.
So that's the great thing that this was actually something that was a substantial signal to find here, and I think it's really interesting to see comparing greens, and this is a kind of a picture into green coffee properties and behaviors.
Because what we've found out is that while most coffees have this kind of peak in the place where it cracks, not every coffee does. Sometimes the coffee, if you have a given profile, like the shape of the moisture release depends on the roast profile you roast it with. But if you use the same roast profile on multiple different coffees, you might find with one coffee it's releasing moisture much earlier than another coffee. Or if it's a very old dried out coffee, it hasn't really got much moisture in it, and you don't get the typical peak. So I think it's kind of like early days in understanding how that's useful. We sort of worked with guys at Square Mile Coffee when we were developing the product. We lent them the prototype, and for them they find it useful because it helps them adjust when they put power into the roaster. Because they find it releases a lot of water and the roaster starts cooling, I think, as I understand it. So they don't want to stop it crashing. So they put extra energy in.
So it gives a picture into the roasting process, and moisture is such a important part of it, because the moisture is responsible for coffee being difficult to heat. It's got a huge effect on the thermodynamics, which is how does the material react when energy is added.
Yeah, the way I think about it, I don't know if I'm right or wrong on this, but I imagine like when it's cracking, the water's boiling and it's kind of changing phase, so it would absorb a lot of energy at that point.
It absorbs. So that's more like the ideal gas law, that kind of if you have a pressurized gas that all of a sudden gets more volume, then the temperature goes linear down.
Oh, I see.
So it's like it's the same way a fridge works. That you compresses the air and then it heats up, and then this long thread behind the fridge is to kind of get rid of the temperature that the
if you open a can, it gets cold, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Or a spray can.
It's the ideal gas law, the relationship between volume and temperature.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So that would happen with any gas and not just water. The reason why water is such an important thing is you need to add a lot of energy to even make it boil. So that's the specific heat capacity of water is very high. And once that's gone, then you have a material left that has got a much lower heat capacity, which means that it responds with a higher temperature increment per energy that you add. So that's why you need to have less energy in the
So
is
the water in the coffee steam before it cracks, when it kind of reaches a certain pressure?
That's an interesting question, because there's a relationship between the boiling point and the pressure. So if you have a pressure cooker, right? So it might be liquid at still at 110 because it's under pressure. But the second that it is released, the pressure drops, and then the boiling point drops down to 100. But the steam also gets a higher volume, so that takes down the temperature. It's also how a snow machine works. High temperature compressed water and air, and then it goes through the nozzle, and then it goes below the freezing point the second that this compressed air and water mixture, it goes into atmospheric. So it's
oh, that's interesting. Like, I think I understand it in a way which is different now.
Okay,
good.
Well, hopefully our listeners are also more. But it's just a specific heat capacity of water and the ideal gas law. That's kind of the.
Well, I know the specific heat of water is really different to specific heat of steam. Like, it takes more energy to heat up water than it does steam.
Water is really. It takes a lot of energy to heat up. All right, so if I should come with a small coffee mind perspective of the future of IKAWA, so we've always used it for as a sample roaster and as a pilot roaster. So pilot roaster is how to explore a green, the flavor space of a green, to select how do I want it to taste, and then once you have explored that on the pilot roaster, then you can go and replicate it on the production roaster. But as I mentioned for you before this, we started to record, I also see the IKAWA as a perfect kind of tool for sensory training. And that's a course that we'll release in August together here in London. And we already do it at the Roasting Professional in Copenhagen. So it's not that it's and it's basically building on Ida's 10-year research into sensory training. So we have found a way to create a set of relevant samples for coffee roasters, and then give personal feedback on their skills, so that the beginners will have something and the experts will get other type of feedback. So here the IKAWA is perfect because it's so easy to make a full space of different colors and different roast profiles that we know the sensory impact of, and then people can get all those samples and get their feedback on their ability or not to kind of differentiate and identify the different modulations. So for me, that's a kind of a future application of the technology that you didn't even think about.
Yeah, no, that's great. I can't wait for the course. I guess what's good about IKAWA in that respect is you can just change one thing at a time. You can just change one little thing on a profile, and
and then you just get the exact result out of it. Okay, so one of the last things, so a lot of the listeners are coffeepreneurs, just like you. Crazy people getting idea and then are too stubborn to kind of not do it. So is there any tips that you think that your hard-earned lessons that you would share with our listeners? So it's all people who are living their dreams and kind of going through all the the stuff it takes.
I think there's different challenges at different scales of business, like the challenges you have when you're just starting is different to once you have a team and that type of thing. So I think as you go through it, the challenges never end.
Yeah.
I don't know, I suppose for me, I think my greatest strength, what led to whatever success we've had with IKAWA, is tenacity, ultimately, like not giving up.
Yeah, I completely agree. But may I add also, one of the things is flexibility about the not giving up, right? So you've been through different phases, trying different things, and you've kind of made some decisions.
Yeah,
kind of giving up something to not give up the core thing, or do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I think when you get it right, in my experience, the market kind of sucks the product out of you in a way, and that's when you've got the product market fit.
Yeah.
But having that, finding that product market fit can be difficult and can take a certain amount of kind of iteration.
Yeah.
To get there. I think as you grow as a company, it's challenging to. Probably the biggest challenge is getting the team to work together and point in the same direction. It's part of as people, we all have our images inside our brains of the way things are, the way things should be, but sharing a common image so you work together effectively is a tough challenge.
It definitely is. And having a startup mentality where you just the tenacity of and the focus, right? It's sometimes it's difficult to either people resonate or they don't.
That's right. I think also like the way things which are right for a startup aren't right for a bigger business often. Like we have to be much more careful with a product which we launch now and try and make sure it really works much better than we had to be when we were a very much smaller company.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big thing for IKAWA, is just kind of stabilizing everything, stabilizing the way we make things and getting it all to work absolutely perfectly, which in manufacturing a product, it's all about absolute tiniest little details. Like we have, because we make, this is something a lot of people perhaps don't know, is that we manufacture the roasters ourselves in London. So if we do have any failures, we get that kind of feedback straight away, and then we've introduced these features where we change it, sometimes quite small elements of a design, to correct any problem that there are, and you kind of slowly honing in on something which is super reliable.
Yeah, the fact that you're manufacturing here in London is also something that surprises. I had a student this week that kind of asked if the machine was done in, I don't remember, some Asian country. I don't know. No, it's done here in London, and she's from the area.
Yeah.
So she didn't even know, and she's got an IKAWA.
Really? Yeah. Well, a lot of people think it's Japanese.
Yeah.
I should actually say IKAWA means coffee in Kirundi, which is the language of Burundi,
and not Japanese.
It is also a Japanese family name, but that's.
Is it? Okay. I didn't know
it is the IKAWA, like IKAWA.com, I think is, I don't know, something in Japan.
Ah. Okay.
So that's why we had to be IKAWA coffee.
Okay.
It's actually just coffee. But,
great.
Yeah. No, I think I can't imagine how we would have got someone else to make it, because the amount of care you have to put into it to make each machine roast the same, and to really think about coffee is like, in a way, it's an industry full of geeks, or kind of like, I don't know, is geek is sort of like connoisseurs, geek, maybe connoisseurs a type of geek in a way, like everybody really is quite geeky, I think, but they really care.
Yeah.
And we really have to put a lot of care into it to make it work.
Yeah.
Well, and we've got fantastic
people are very
team.
particular about their things when they are specialty coffee geeks. So you have to kind of reflect that as a company, don't you?
Yeah, I think you have to genuinely care about the product you're making.
So what if some of the listeners want to try out an IKAWA, and you have a worldwide distributor net? I know that in the US and also in South Korea, I've met distributors, and so
yeah, we have distributors in around the world, in sort of South Korea, China, various other places, and those are generally places where English isn't widely spoken. But for the US and Europe, we service those markets directly at the moment.
It's just if people wanted to have a go in it, they can of course come to Copenhagen in my lab and have a go. But also here in the UK, they can just visit.
Well, they can come around and have a go.
Yeah.
People are very welcome to pop in and have a try.
Also, I do online courses, and if you hear this and you want to go on the course but don't have an IKAWA, just reach out, and we might be able to find somebody in people's area so they can.
Yeah, we have a pretty extensive, I think, I don't know, maybe 7,000 pro users now around the world.
Yeah.
So most cities there'll be someone that uses it.
Yeah. Great. Okay, Andrew, thank you so much for your time and your willingness to participate in this kind of talk. It's I love to reach out to brands that I really have a personal kind of relationship to, and IKAWA is definitely the first technology that I kind of realized is something completely different, and so I've been, it's been great to be able to use your technology for so many years, for so many important, making me sleep at night before an important research project, and have given me a lot of great experiences with clients as a consultant. And I really enjoy doing the online courses. It's so easy to use the technology to really teach people about coffee roasting, even though we are far apart. So thanks for all your hard work to bring this technology to the world.
Yeah, thank you,
We
Morten.
appreciate it a lot. So thank you very much for your time.
Oh, well, thank you for talking to me, and thanks for being such a great supporter of IKAWA, and part of our journey from when we were just a couple of people to where we are now. It's fantastic.
Great. Yeah. So if you want to kind of try it, reach out to IKAWA, and let's see if we can find somebody in your area to give it a go. I can help you make it actionable in your production area through the online course. And if you want to train your sensory skills as a coffee roaster from scratch, then we have plans on how to help you with the IKAWA and our training. And we'll do the first training here in London in August, and then we'll do it frequently here, also at London School of Coffee. We already will be running the Roasting Professional, where I use the IKAWA also for the sensory training. And then hopefully we'll be able to do this on a pure e-learning platform in a year or so, where people just having an IKAWA just need to get the Coffee Mind e-learning and have a friend who can then be instructed in how to prepare all the samples for you. And then we have a data collection platform that will do all the statistics on your sensory skills. So yeah, I think that's kind of concludes this podcast. So thank you very much,
Thanks,
Andrew.
Morten.